Are Indigenous journalists biased, or are they simply trying to restructure the injustice of mainstream media? In this presentation, I will be exploring objectivity in relation to Indigenous news media and looking at Indigenous journalists' thoughts on objectivity. The concept of objectivity is defined as the need for journalists to report facts in an unemotional, value-free manner, which prioritizes both sides of the story. It separates fact from opinion in an emotionally detached way, whilst striving for fairness and balance. When considering Indigenous news media, it is often portrayed as biased. However, they remain objective in the attempt to show the facts and voice their issues about the community. This easy example is an article found from Native News Online. In line with this year's International Overdose Awareness Day on August 31st, the article used this day as an opportunity to recognize the issue of drug use amongst Native American tribal communities of Indian country, where the severe usage of drugs is seen to be damaging their tribal communities, posing as a major threat to progress and well-being in Indian country. The language used in this article could perhaps be considered biased. However, the voices heard were those of individuals that held positions in government or were tribal leaders. The careful evaluation of the article allowed for an understanding of how individuals would perceive it as bias. However, the neutrality suggested its purpose was to bring light to the issue that is currently occurring amongst Native Americans. In Burroughs' reading, it says, Indigenous media are biased and they are partial, attaining their raison d'etre to exist for the community from a detached, impartial position would be impossible. However, their impartiality and community attachment do not diminish their value. Indigenous media are complex, multifaceted media with roles that extend beyond democratic functions and provide essential communication mechanism for Indigenous peoples. They give voice to Indigenous people and perspectives. Burroughs argues that although they are criticized as being biased, the meaning of community does not ruin their value. It is their objectivity that revolves around the factual information of Indigenous communities that brings forward the truth and counteracts mainstream media articles. There are many layers to Indigenous media, which provides a platform for their opinions and perspectives. To complicate the concept, I looked at comparing two different news media articles from 2020 on a young Indigenous boy named Quaden Bales. He was constantly bullied at school for his disability of dwarfism, and his story went viral by a video his mother posted of him where he was shattered after being bullied. On the one hand, the 7 News article lacked a great deal of depth and excluded Aboriginal voices. Instead, it included celebrity Cardi B's opinion, which she voiced on social media. It overlooked the issue at hand and was more concerned about the absence of the Bales family on social media. Whilst on the other hand, the NITV article gave a voice to the Indigenous community. It looked at information that enhanced Indigenous perspectives and overall demonstrated a positive picture of Quaden's situation by simply trying to tell his story. However, the article might be considered biased as the Indigenous voice used was Quaden's mother, who was trying to bring to light the issue of Indigenous children living with a disability. Perhaps it is worthwhile to consider here that the NITV article provides a factual representation that simply encourages a voice for the injustice of Indigenous individuals living with a disability. Indigenous journalists argue that their work counteracts biased mainstream media coverage, which attempts to diminish the Indigenous communities and individuals. They feel that they must correct mainstream media misrepresentations and provide better for the community. They believe that they prioritize Indigenous voices and perspective whilst remaining objective to produce content that supports, informs, and educates society. Lastly, I pose the question, how might we distinguish between right and wrong when thinking about objectivity in Indigenous news media?